thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to prattle on for about 15 minutes talking sort of the most happening social media trends that we've been observing. Before we do that, I'm just going to do a round of introductions really. My name is Thom Morris. I'm a trends manager at GWI based here in our London office. But I'm delighted to be joined today by Charlie Elliott, strategy director at Billion Dollar Boy. Charlie, tell us more about the company.
Hi everyone, I'm Charlie, we're from Billion Dollar Boy. We are a global advertising agency for the creator age. What that means is we put creators and influencers at the heart of everything that we do. That includes billboards in Melbourne for Lipton Iced Tea, going into the metaverse with Heineken, and I lead the strategy team, so we really kind of push innovation within the influencer space, working with partners such as GWI.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for coming in today. Sorry we didn't give you your own slide, by the way. Just a little bit more information on GWI, if you haven't noticed. We're an audience insights technology company. We interview around 950,000 respondents every year, representing 2.7 billion internet users in 52 markets. We're trusted by some of the world's biggest brands, media publications, and agencies to really keep up with their audiences at speed. And now with a resource like that, it's invaluable when you're talking about something as broad and as fast moving as social media. If I can be as fast moving today in the time I've got, that would be fantastic. So we're going to dive right in. First, we're just going to get a sense of where social media kind of sits within people's routines, because we all know that people have a lot of different ways to spend their time. So it's quite nice to think that a lot of people use social media as 2 hours, 26 minutes every day. It's pretty solid, there's plenty of reach, but you don't need eagle eyes to spot what's kind of going on here. Over time, there's been some serious fluctuation in how much time people actually spend using social media. It doesn't seem to be able to capture as much attention as it did during lockdown or at some point during 2022. Something's preventing it from really getting to the reach it should be able to. And we point to lockdown a lot for this kind of reason. We don't have as much free time as we used to. But the important thing to remember is this is a global perspective. There are still plenty of opportunities all around the world. And if we look at North America, for example, they're the one region that's spending 5 minutes longer using social media now than they were in 2020. And it's just as important to look at things by age as well. Many people in this room are right to think that Gen Z, the undisputed king of social media, yep, they spend the most time using it every day, and there's plenty of opportunities to reach them through this format. But, as you can see, they're the only generation to be spending less time using social media since 2020. Now, again, the obvious reason for this is really COVID. Around 2 in 3 Gen Z say that they're actively seeking new hobbies or lifestyles, and around about half are trying to forge new relationships and friendships in the coming year. So if you think about that time they kind of lost during COVID, it makes sense that social media doesn't have quite the same priority as it did back then. But then there's plenty of opportunities to reach baby boomers here. I mean, I'm sure you've all noticed that they're the generation that's increased their time most since 2020. It wasn't really a lockdown fad, those digital behaviours are kind of stuck. Now Charlie, I know you've got plenty to say about this, so take it away.
So the majority of briefs that we tend to get at BDB are Gen Z focused, and I think all of us as marketers are really concentrating on that demographic. But as Tom said, baby boomers are increasingly using social media more and more, and they really want to be represented within advertising, obviously within influencer space as well. One of our most successful campaigns at BDB was actually with L'Oreal Paris for their rosy oil serum. We worked with creators aged 50 plus to represent the brand, and it worked so well that we're now working with 50 plus creators across the L'Oreal Nordics portfolio. So it's really important that we consider other demographics, not just Gen Z.
A TLDR for millennials in the room, it just means that all our parents are on Facebook and they're spending much longer than you might think, which is travesty. Anyway, we're going to move on to some of the more big hitting platforms around the world, get a sense of who's performing well, who are the disruptors, and really what's the kind of vibe behind each platform. So to start, I want to sort of challenge a misconception here. It's quite sensible to assume that, say, monthly time on Facebook has been decreasing in the past year, so let's have a look at another app elsewhere, like TikTok. I'm sure you've probably heard of TikTok, it's pretty niche, but yeah, fair enough. It's Gen Z's favourite social media platform. It's the fastest growing among baby boomers, and so it makes a lot of sense then that Facebook is kind of losing out to TikTok. But that's absolutely not the case. We wanted to show just how much staying power Facebook and other meta platforms kind of have today. So if you take Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, monthly user base outside of China on any of those three is higher than the combined might on Discord, Pinterest, TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, LinkedIn. It's so much staying power in these old archaic services now that it's really not worth turning away from them. There's so much sort of staying power that gives you all that free opportunity to reach users without having to just chase the next thing. Now, if you think about it today, the average person has around 6 social media accounts. That number's doubled since 2012. So they're not just flocking away. There's plenty of apps to service different needs. Now, before I sort of get more into that point, Charlie, do you want to add anything to this?
So I think it's really important when we're looking at all of these different meta platforms that we think about how they're being used as well. I think a lot of us within our London advertising bubble can be quite kind of tunnel vision on how people might be using Facebook, but you've got marketplace, you've got communities and groups, as well as interacting with friends and family. So at BDB, we work with GWI to really kind of dig into that. Obviously, we know as well that Meta announced today that Threads is launching in 2 days' time as well. So it'll be really interesting to come back to this data this time next year and see how much of the pie they still have.
So what I just said before about talking more about how each platform kind of appeals to people differently, we wanted to get a sense of how people use these platforms. So what you're seeing on screen is the most popular use case from different users on these platforms you see here. It's quite easy to explain, really. Facebook are most likely to be messaging friends and family. They like to connect. If you're on Snapchat and Instagram, you'll like to be sharing content. If you're on TikTok or Reddit, you're looking for funny content. If you're on Twitter, chances are you're trying to find interesting content. Each one of these is just an example of how people use them all differently. They all suit a different need. Every brand needs to recognize that. But also, when we think about the popularity of a disruptor like TikTok, it doesn't mean that people are going to suddenly start using it in the same way they do Facebook. So if you understand really how your audience is using the platforms and the kind of vibes behind that, you're better well placed to be able to actually reach them. But there's more to it than just how they're using platforms. There's actually the kind of vibe, and Dolly's going to help me sort of explain this one a bit clearer. And you're probably all familiar with this meme. It just went gangbusters the other year, and there were so many different variations on it. But she hit the nail on the head. The modern state of social media means that different platforms kind of demand a different version of ourselves. Now, there's a very solid reason that Dolly doesn't wear her LinkedIn outfit on Tinder, because that's just not the vibe of the platform. And we wanted to kind of look at this from a data perspective. So we asked users on 9 distinct social media platforms, what kind of content do you actually want to see? And there was nothing really overarching that's popular across them all. And thank God there wasn't, because that's what we wanted to find. Now, if you look at funny content, it's generally quite popular, but it's not going to work everywhere. So if you see the kind of brands on TikTok, Duolingo, Ryanair, you'll know what I mean when I say they're absolutely killing it. Their humor is just like on point. But they don't do that same approach on somewhere like LinkedIn and Twitter, because users on both of those platforms couldn't be more averse to seeing funny content. The same goes for community-oriented content. If you're trying to build a kind of following around your brand, there's plenty of features on different social media platforms to help you do this. Facebook has them too, but the users there aren't necessarily enthusiastic about it as they are on, say, Discord or Reddit. That's not to say that brands just can't do any of these things, but it's easier to get a sense of how consumers think and behave on different platforms and how that makes it easier to target them. So now we're going to take a trip around the world to 2 different regions, Western and APAC, specifically China, just to get a sense of some geographical trends that are happening around the world. The first one, this suite kind of encapsulates a trend that's being talked about a lot at the moment, the sense that social media itself is becoming a form of search engine. Now, here's a little interesting tidbit about Western social media trends. We're quite boring. We don't really change very often. They're very rigid. And by that, when we see an actual change in behavior, we know we're on something. So in the last 2 years, we saw a 52% increase in the number of Western TikTokers using that platform to find inspiration for things to buy. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what it means is that people are using social media increasingly to discover new brands, find new products. And this has quite a lot of implications for brands, doesn't it? If you want to take it away.
Yep, so from a strategy perspective, we're finding this really interesting. This is going beyond your kind of standard hashtag strategy and actually thinking back to keywords. Any of you who have got a background in SEO, we're now starting to transfer that over into social media, which is really interesting. And at BDB, when we're working with creators, we're then working with them around which words should be in their captions, which keywords they should be using in order to help actually a share of search, but within a social media platform instead.
I want to put a pin in that as well, because we're definitely going to come back to that in just a later slide. Because first, stopping in China now. Now, if there was quirky things about Western social media trends, China's no different. This is a landscape that isn't very competitive, by which I mean it's very difficult for new players to get off the ground. The main reason, the Tencent super app WeChat, Yes, it's still the most popular social media platform in China, but as you can see, it's no longer the fastest growing. That honor now belongs to, and please forgive me here, Xiaohongshu, which is more colloquially known as Little Red Book or just Red. Now, the growth of this app is very interesting for two reasons. One, it's coming to blows with something as big as WeChat, but also because it's being driven by a younger audience. And that really seems to be tied to something like live streaming, something the service is very, very, well, emphasizing heavily. Now, what this tells us about two different markets here is that social commerce tends to be in the West about convenience. We want to treat social media as a sort of elegant part of our purchase journeys. In somewhere like China, that content has to be packaged differently, has to be engaging and entertaining. And when you think back to that first slide we talked about where the number of Gen Zs spending less time on social media is growing, you can think about how that content has to be repackaged in a more engaging way. And that feels like a nice segue now onto our next section, really just talking about more social commerce trends. And we're going to start by referring back to the one we just discussed. So this is obviously a really hot topic, the progress of social to search, sorry. And I know it feels like it's sort of come out of nowhere, but we wanted to prove that it's been happening for a bit longer than you think. Since around 2019, actually, which was the first time that people started predominantly discovering new brands and products on social media than they did on a search engine. Now, Charlie, we added a bit about this before where we said about how it means discoverability has to be taken or approached differently. So you have to think about more than SEO. It means like time of day posting or things like hashtags. But it really is important to think about what inspiration means on social media too. Plenty of my friends, weirdos, but they run a house renovation account, and it's like checking in quite often to see what products they're using, how that's going. But it's a form of influence in its own way. It's telling me to find inspiration for products that when I eventually do get around to owning my own house, I'm going to be looking for inspiration by there rather than just 10 blue links. The same can be said for something as simple like recipes and food. If you're thinking of going vegan, then you're probably more likely to get inspiration from someone who's actually done the diet than 10 blue links on Google. Now, just a point about influencers. I think they're a pretty obvious mainstay of social commerce, and we're not about to say that they're not anymore, but the discourse around them has absolutely changed. We're talking more about authenticity. We're talking about de-influencing, which you're not aware of, is where people are essentially warding you away from products that have been falsely advertised. Now, we want to get a sense of how effective they are today. So we looked at consumers in 12 markets and just asked them straight up, how likely are you to buy a product recommended by an influencer? Pretty mixed bag, don't you think? It's not very clear cut as to how effective they really are. But this is consumers in 12 markets. If we look just at Gen Z and millennials, they're more likely to buy products recommended by influencers. They're more likely to say that they're trustworthy and expertise about the products they talk about. And most importantly, they're more likely to say that influencers are more engaging than a regular ad. So influencers still have their place. It's just about finding the right partnership. Everyone remember the Cristiano Ronaldo Euro conversation that happened there? Yeah, I've seen a few nods. Love him or hate him, and we're not going to mention any brands here, but it's a very good point about genuine partnerships. You've got to think carefully about the people you work with. Now, Charlie's going to fill you in a little bit more here about how influence doesn't just mean, well, influence is not one distinct group. Really, anyone can be a source of influence, can't they?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And influencer is still quite a loaded term, and it can be quite divisive, but I think it has a bit of a historical kind of legacy, feeling like it's something like a Love Islander who's offering teeth whitening services. But as Thom just said for himself, he's looking at his friends' TikTok accounts to get influence. From all the data that you can see here, everybody follows somebody of influence. So at Billion Dollar Boy, when we say that we work with influencers and content creators, we're working with sports stars, we're working with illustrators, we're working with musicians. Everybody has influence. It's how you work with them authentically. So everybody from a celebrity with millions and millions of followers all the way down to user-generated content that's created by your friends and family. How you tap into influence and how you create authenticity is the most important thing when you're thinking about working with influencers.
Charlie, thank you so much. I'm just going to take one more moment of your time. I know you're so keen to get me off the stage, aren't you? We're just going to look at two more bonus trends today, and I'll be really, really quick. The first one is on video, because I didn't want to come here today and say that short-form video isn't working. Everyone's quite familiar with that Mark Zuckerberg quote a few years ago, where he literally cited unprecedented competition from TikTok. Well, it's working. They're doubling down on short-form, and this is the increased percentage of people who are watching short-form video on these platforms. Right, I'm racing off the screen now. So the last one is audio. I'm going to leave you with this. Younger people love voice notes. The older you are, the less likely you are to send one every day. As a millennial, this is genuinely baffling for me, as weird as it sounds, but voice notes offer us a different way to be creative in the same way video did. If you want to engage with consumers, encourage them to communicate in a way that they feel comfortable, maybe ask them to, instead of slide into your DMs, slide into the VNs instead. I'm so sorry for that joke. Yeah, guys, thanks for having me today. I'm sorry I had to race to the end, but our emails are on screen. Just reach out if you have any questions at all.
Thank you, Thom. Thank you, Charlie. Details on the screen, and you can find them as well in the conference. Ask some questions. Well done for packing that much insight into the time that you were given.